Good morning, everybody. I think it is still morning, and welcome to the 13th Annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Machik with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I am moderating the management track today. And assisting me is Leah Langby from the IFLIS Library System. Thank you, Leah. We're kicking off this track with Angela Knoll, and Angela is the director of the Southwest Wisconsin Library System. And I approached Angela about talking about this. What do we do when we change positions, change jobs, change libraries, and when we're in management? Do we change our style of management? Do we adapt to our new staff? When and where and how much do we do that? And what do we do? So Angela's going to talk to us about that. Angela is also going to take questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to share those in chat or in the Q&A. Remember, you can post to the Q&A anonymously. So Angela, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Jamie. Thanks for the great introduction. Thank you to Leah Langby for also being here today. Today, we are going to talk about changing leadership styles. So, some quick objectives before we really get going. The first thing we're going to do is spend some time reviewing some common leadership styles to help you better understand what type of leader you might be. Then we're going to talk about when it's necessary to change your style and when you might expect your staff to adapt. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of communication in this process as well. So, first, let's talk about 10 common management styles. Each style has the potential to play a different role in an organization's success or failure. The management style or styles you choose can be critical to building and maintaining your library's culture and also has significant effects on your ability to retain quality staff and attract new staff when you need them. As I highlight each management style, think about whether the skills it offers or whether it offers you skills, characteristics, and tactics your organization might need, and whether you think you could use them effectively to manage others. All right, our first style, autocratic, is probably the most notorious. The autocratic manager acts, as the name implies, alone. This leadership style focuses heavily on efficiency and results. They often make decisions without consulting others and expect their staff to follow instructions precisely and support decisions without pushback. Because librarianship is often collaborative in nature, autocratic leadership probably feels really icky at first, but there are times and places for it. So don't be afraid or unwilling to consider it. All right, next we have laissez-faire style management. I had a professor in college that always called this lazy fair, and that's a great way to remember it because this style utilizes minimal supervision over staff once a task has been delegated. It's very relaxed and it can help foster positive team attributes like independence and creativity. But it can also go off track sometimes if the minimal supervision turns into no supervision at all. An important factor in this style is accountability for both the manager and staff. It's still important to check in from time to time to make sure things are heading in the right direction. All right, democratic. Democratic leadership is often viewed as a combination or a happy medium between autocratic and laissez-faire styles of leadership. Democratic managers often seek involvement and opinions from their team before a decision is made, but also expect their team to support and move along with a decision once it has been made. This leadership style attempts to ensure that most staff are content with the decisions and change, but it doesn't strive to appease everyone. All right, collaborative. Collaborative leadership is one that most of us here today are probably naturally comfortable with because it lends itself greatly to, I feel, the values of librarianship. This style solicits feedback from your team on things like policies and procedures and other important decisions with an aim to find solutions to issues, empower your team, and improve your library. Collecting feedback is critical to the collaborative leadership process, which can sometimes cause pauses or minor setbacks as you adapt to feedback. You plan to do something, you collect the feedback, you plan to do it, you implement it, and every now and then something doesn't go like you expect it might. So every now and then with this style, you do have to step back and rework some things. All right, inspirational. Inspirational leaders rely on their own honesty and emotions to inspire their team and grow, both personally and professionally. While this leadership style might sound amazing, it's not one for the faint-hearted. With inspirational leadership, there are often times that you have to say hard truths to your staff in order to get them to improve. It can, however, be an appropriate style to implement after or alongside styles that focus on building a strong team or when you already have a strong foundation. All right, example setting. I am definitely an example setting leader. Example setting managers do just as much as the name implies. This type of leader isn't afraid to step in and do dirty or undesirable parts of the work. I don't know how many of you have ever been the one to go plunge the toilet or clean up the mess after story time, deal with the difficult patron when you see them coming rather than run from the desk and hide. This type of leader sets the pace for the organization, but also relies on high standards and accountability to make sure that everyone is doing their part. Again, not afraid to do the most menial or disgusting task at the library, but wants to make sure everyone is willing to pitch in and help with those when appropriate. All right, authoritative. This is also a notorious leadership style. Most employees detest authoritative leadership and can often compare it to dictatorship, but it can be extremely effective in a chaotic work environment. The authoritative leader creates a highly structured environment and expects their team to do their work the same way each time. Authoritative leaders aren't afraid to take disciplinary action with underperforming staff, which can be essential when the organization suffers due to employees who might slack off or not give as good of work as you would like. Authoritative leaders, the difference between autocratic and authoritative leaders, they're very similar. Authoritative leaders will occasionally ask for input before a decision is made, where an autocratic leader, the decision is made, this is what we're doing, this is how we're moving forward. All right, strategic. Strategic leaders are always looking for the big picture and also consider multiple options and potential outcomes in their decision making before they make a decision. So depending on the size of your library, some of the day-to-day oversight and achievements of a strategic leader might be shared. So strategic leaders are more likely to pass things on, to delegate tasks when appropriate. So they're going to share that load with supervisory positions like department heads, sub-team leaders, or project leaders. Ideation is usually a strength for strategic leaders, which is great because, again, it's that big picture. This is the end goal. This is where we want to get to. But sometimes where strategic leadership can fail is that when the finer or smaller details maybe get overlooked because there's so much focus on that big picture. All right, results-oriented leadership. Results-oriented leaders view efficiency as vital and are typically focused on getting things done. So, one weakness of this leadership style is that sometimes rules or policies, written or unwritten, can sometimes become secondary in the pursuit of positive results. So if you are a type A person who does things by the book and follows the rule, you might clash with a results oriented leader because they're okay with sidestepping a policy here or there to accomplish something. This type of leader does appreciate staff who are can or are willing to try to find easier or better ways to get to results. And then sometimes too much focus on one project or one goal by a results oriented leader can actually lead to other goals or services suffering. So it's important that balance be kept in mind here. You don't want to give too much attention to one project while others kind of start to crumble around you. All right, affiliative. Lastly, this is our last leadership style for the day. Affiliative leaders are often found to be mingling and making connections with their team, patrons, municipal or government leaders, service organizations in your community, and all sorts of different groups. I think of this as like the perfect leadership style for someone you have doing your outreach, right? This type of leader is personable. They are often hands-on in the work they do. They want to be there, they want to be involved, and they will prioritize those types of tasks over less exciting tasks that maybe keep them alone in their office. One downside to this leadership style is, again, it's finding that balance between making those connections and completing goals and building relationships, and then providing strong service and making sure, especially if this is your director, right? Like, I don't know how many of you are directors on the call, but there are definitely community focused activities you do as a director, and then there are director activities where you just have to go to your office and get things done. So that part of the job, the alone getting things done, might be difficult for an affiliative leader. All right. So I know I went over those really quickly. We will make sure the slides get sent out so you can dig into those descriptions a little bit more. But now I really want you to think about, what type of leader are you? Your leadership style is based on your own values, goals, and personality, and it's influenced by the goals of your library and the values and personalities of the staff you manage. Additionally, your leadership style will change as you grow in your role or as your staff or role changes. If you feel comfortable, drop what styles you feel you use right now into the chat. We'd love to hear what you think you are utilizing. When I first started my library director career over a decade ago, I would have definitely described myself as a collaborative, example setting, democratic leader, which are all great values to bring to librarianship. I think a lot of us probably would recognize those qualities in our leadership. But today, thinking about it as I was putting this presentation together, I've really morphed into a combination of strategic, inspirational, and affiliative, with a touch of authoritative when it's necessary. You know, I love going out and making connections with the community. I love making sure my staff have what they need to be successful at work and in their personal lives with their own hobbies. I'm a strategic person, so I love thinking about that big picture, and hopefully I'm not missing too many of those small steps along the way. But I am not afraid, if push comes to shove and a decision needs to be made, to make that decision hopefully with input from my staff. But I will make a decision if I have to, or I feel we're to a point in a project where we can't keep kind of talking around something. We have to make a decision. There have been times where I have needed to be more autocratic, and this is the decision, this is how we're doing it, and you as a staff are expected to make changes to go along with this. And there are also times where I have had enough trust in my staff's abilities that I have been able to use laissez-faire style leadership. And that is a really special place to be, where you can hand a project off and have your team run with something. It's amazing. But again, you still have to check in and make sure they are getting what they need, they're staying on track to have that positive outcome in the end. So each management style, again, has its time and place. You just have to figure out which one is the appropriate one for you in whichever situation you are in. And it's great if you can be comfortable using multiple styles of management because you will have to have difficult conversations. You will have to make hard decisions. And if you are in leadership, you are expected to make those decisions. All right. Next, I want to talk just a little bit about leading by strengths. Before we talk about when it might be necessary for you to change your leadership style, or when you might expect your staff to adapt to a new style, I wanted to talk briefly about strengths. Every individual has strengths and weaknesses, and as managers, it's our job to identify those and determine where to focus. It can be really easy. I have caught myself before, really easy to fixate on someone's weaknesses because problems tend to arise from those weaknesses, whether they are real weaknesses or perceived. So I'm going to challenge you today to consider leading by strengths instead. Each of the individuals on your team bring a certain set of strengths, and playing to those strengths or what they do best is a great way to increase engagement, productivity, performance, and staff retention. So to talk a little bit more about strengths, for those of you who may not know about it, Clifton Strengths is a very common tool that I've actually used at a few different organizations now to help discover the strengths of my team and myself. And so this, there's two different versions of this. There's a book you can purchase. The book costs about $25 and is very useful. Or you can also pay to do the assessment directly online. My team here at Southwest Wisconsin Library System, our professional office staff, is actually in the process of doing StrengthsFinder 2.0 again right now. We're going to come together at our February staff meeting and report back what all of our strengths are. Each assessment takes about 30 minutes to complete. And once the assessment is complete, each individual receives a customized report describing their strengths from 34 themes that are all available on the book. You can also find out what those themes are on their website. Discovering your own strengths can be a game changer on an individual level. Having a manager that allows you to play to your strengths and sets you up for success is even better. And when everyone on your team knows each other's strengths, that's when organizations can really go far in achieving goals. One of the things I love about StrengthsFinder is that it also provides prompts and suggestions for engaging with individuals and promoting action based on their strengths. So these are things you can use as a manager to have conversations with your team, but it's also things your team can use to maybe better converse or understand each other as well. There are some other free strengths assessments online. I have never used them, but I do know that Clifton Strengths is the original and it's considered the gold standard. So if leading by strengths is something you're interested in, I would definitely check that out more. All right. So now, when is it necessary to change leadership styles? There are typically going to be multiple times in your career when you'll need to change your leadership style. So let's see when some of those might be. All right. It usually becomes necessary to change your leadership style when there's a significant change in circumstances at your library. The most common place where this happens are when your team dynamics change. So either you start at in a new position, a new department, or a new library completely, or possibly when there's an agency-wide project. You can also consider changing your leadership styles during crisis situations, when your organizational goals evolve to a point where it's necessary, or in some instances, when your current management style is just no longer working. So the easiest place to anticipate a change in leadership style is when you start working for a new for or with a new team or at a new organization that has different experiences, expectations, or preferred working styles. For library directors or managers, this most often occurs when you move to a different position at a new library. And then again, for department heads or other managers, it can result when there's a new team member or a restructuring of teams at your library. This situation can create an unease for staff and those in leadership. So I highly recommend approaching new teams with a neutral, supporting leadership style that feels natural to you until you're able to form those relationships with your new team or your new staff. Unless you are aware of the need for others. So maybe as part of your interview process, you were told that there are some issues with performance with someone on the team. So if you're given that information in advance, you might have to use a more authority-driven leadership style in a new setting. Your leadership style can also change when you, your department, or your library take on a new project. A great example here is when your library goes through a major renovation, expansion, or building project. Building projects create a lot of added stress for your library director or whoever might be managing the project on your staff. And that stress often finds a way to filter all the way down into your entry level positions. During times like these, additional staff might take on leadership roles to help even the load a little bit. And day-to-day responsibility and decision-making might change. And that creates an opportunity for change in leadership styles. There's also a lot of kind of unknown that comes with building projects. You have maybe an architectural drawing of what the space will look like, but you don't really know how the space is going to work. And that can create some unease. There's always going to be staff who disagree with how space is laid out too. So that can create additional tension as well. All right, let's move on to crisis situations. Has anyone felt like they've been in a crisis situation in the last 5 years at their library? I know for me that at the beginning of the pandemic, every day felt like we were tackling a new crisis. Crisis situations are something that we all do our best to prepare and train for, but we all dread as well. More direct leadership, like authoritative or autocratic leadership styles, are often needed in times of crisis because situations are urgent and decisions have to be made quickly. sometimes with very little concrete information about what's truly going on or what you can expect next. Again, leading during a crisis can be difficult. The important thing to remember is that crisis leadership is temporary. It should be temporary. It should feel temporary. And hopefully, sooner rather than later, you'll be able to get back to a place where you can return to your preferred leadership styles. All right, evolving organization goals. Nobody wants a stagnant library. And in a perfect world, we all have strategic plans. Southwest Wisconsin Library System just finalized their new strategic plan last week. I sent it out to my library directors today. Was excited to cross that one off my list. But this plan does create some instances where what some people might not be very excited for some of the things in the plan because it means we have to change. It's times like this where more transformational or inspirational leadership styles may be effective, and really helping people understand why we have to make the change or why this change was requested, things like that. Again, the goals of the organization are they're going to change. So having a leadership style that can help people move through those changes is very important. All right, finally, we all get to a point in our career or with a team where the leadership style you might prefer or that you've depended on for a long time just no longer works. It can be due to a number of different factors. Team dynamics change over time. It could have to deal with even just personal things creeping into work performance for some people. Being open to employee feedback and the development of your own needs for your staff can help you know when it's time to adapt or change your learning style or your leadership style. Sorry. Constructive criticism exists for directors and department heads too. So it's important to know that your staff should have that two-way communication in letting you know, like, this isn't really working. Hopefully you are all professional enough that you can take that advice and really lean into it and say, wow, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. We'll try something new. So remember that flexibility, self-awareness, and communication are vital to successfully changing your leadership styles. All right. When should staff be expected to adapt? If you ask your staff, you will probably get a wide range of responses from we should be ready to adapt whenever our manager says so to I am not going to change. I've been here for however long and this is how I do things. While every good manager will employ different leadership styles in different situations, it's unrealistic to think that staff should never have to change. Staff who are naturally adverse to change are going to struggle during these periods, but a strong leader should be able to recognize ways to help them adapt and give them some wiggle room to get on board with change. It's very common that when a new director or manager joins a team, staff will have to adapt some of their expectations and methods. This is especially common when a long-serving director or department head leaves an organization. We all hope that this process is smooth, but it's common to have at least a few kinks along the way. In this situation, I highly encourage those in leadership roles to learn the hows and whys of current ways of doing things before instituting change whenever possible. Organizational restructuring is something that might be the worst nightmare for staff who are uncomfortable with change. But common things such as, again, building projects, which we just talked about, budget changes, or updates to position descriptions can create environments where staff need to adapt. Typically, this work happens over a period of time, and managers may need to help move staff towards change. Usually, organizational restructuring doesn't happen overnight. You enter it, you enter a period of restructuring where everyone knows that things are going to change. Um, if someone is absolutely resistant to organizational restructuring, you might have to use other tools like improvement plans, early retirement, if that is something that your organization can offer, or separation, as I like to call it. You may have to let an employee go due to restructuring if they cannot change to how the organization needs to operate. So how many of us are great at adapting to things on the fly? I like to think that I am, but it's not something that I enjoy doing regularly. Crisis situations are unique. We just talked about them from the management perspective, but they can be very confusing from the staff side of things, right? They just don't know what to expect anymore. Like they just don't know. It's like your worst Monday over and over again. A crisis situation can turn the best, like laissez-faire style collaborative manager into an authoritative manager in the blink of an eye. And it's important to stress in periods of crisis that the leadership style you're using is temporary, again, until that new normal is established. Again, I lean back to the pandemic and some of the decisions we had to make during that time. Utilizing leadership styles that aim to build trust and rely on employee strengths can help to mitigate crisis leadership if and when you need it. All right. Last on this slide, just as you'll adapt as your team develops and grows, it should be expected that your staff adapt as they change and grow too. Every now and then, your team might knot themselves into a ball that might seem hard to straighten out again. But if you play to their strengths, you should come out okay in the end. All right, I wanted to give you a little look into what the last decade of my life has looked like in terms of management. Things I want to talk about what has and hasn't changed. So for those of you who don't know me, I have had 4 positions at 4 very different organizations in the last 10-ish years, which seems like a lot of change. I am a glass half full person. So let's start with what stayed the same, at least for me, as I worked across these 4 agencies. I have always been lucky to have dedicated staff who love their roles, love their library, and love their community. I've been very lucky to work in communities that have supported the library when I really truly needed it. And I've always had that core group of citizens who were ready to step up when I needed help. My general role as a director has stayed the same. My director tasks didn't change dramatically from position to position, except for, I would say, my new position as a system director is more different than I expected originally. And finally, my sacred cows of librarianship have, for the most part, stayed the same. These are values like transparency, the right to privacy, leading with kindness, and just standard library best practices like you have to have your library card or an ID to check out items at the library. So those are all things that for the most part I have control over. What has changed, or things that I couldn't immediately control, The big one is always budgets and funding. Some of my libraries, when I made moves, the budget situation changed for the better. I have been in communities where I go to city council or the village board and they say, just tell us what you need. Tell us what you need. We'll make it happen. That is an amazing place to be. But I've also been in the position where it's cut your budget, cut your budget. What can you cut this year? Which makes leadership hard sometimes. I have been in positions where I've been able to boost my staff's pay significantly, but I've also had to let staff go due to budget cuts and strategic plan priorities changing the goals of the library. Another really important one is municipal relationships. My municipal relationships changed every time I made a change. And in some communities, it changed multiple times while I was there because just like turnover for library directors is high, turnover for village or city clerks is actually higher in the state right now. So it was always important to me that I had a strong relationship with my city hall or village hall staff. And sometimes I had to work hard to build or rebuild those relationships in depending on what position I was in. But to me, the work was worth it. And then finally, the staff culture that you walk into when you start a new position, whether it be in a library that you're currently working at or a brand new library, is something that has always been different everywhere I go. I've been blessed to always have highly professional, highly functioning teams. But I've also had times where I've walked in thinking, this team is amazing, we're great, we're going to do some things. And it's going to be awesome. And then getting there and getting in the actual position and realizing that there were some issues that we needed to work on before we could really start to move the organization forward like we had hoped. So when you look at these items from a management lens, you can easily see why successful successful leaders might need to utilize different management styles depending on what they're working on. How you approach city council to ask for a budget increase might be different than how you work to train your staff and the type of style you use. All right. Gauging staff culture and motivating for change. So unless you've been with an organization for a long time, it's hard to know exactly what you might walk into on your first day or those first few weeks as a leader. What you find might meet or exceed your expectations, or you might leave that first day wondering what just happened and whether or not you made the right decision to change positions. There are also times when teams seem to be operating like well-oiled machines from the outside, but once you get in, you see a lot of unproductive or unhealthy behaviors. It's always important to gauge staff culture before you implement any sort of change. First, you want to start by observing the current situation. This is sometimes more difficult than it should seem, and there's no set amount of time you should wait before making a change. What you really need to do is build trust with your team so that you have minimal resistance when you do decide to make the change. When you find yourself at a point where you know you need to make a change, it's beneficial to try to meet with staff either individually, in small groups, or as a whole team first, depending on the dynamics of your library. You want to try to gain deeper insight into their perspectives and experiences to try to better understand why things might seem dysfunctional, and also to help your team understand why you need to change and where or what your end goal might look like. So again, when you're ready to make that change, you need to clearly communicate the reasons for change, those desired outcomes, and any potential impact on individuals or teams. If possible, and it's not always possible, encourage your team to participate in decision making for change. You know, when you're looking at something strategically, maybe as part of a strategic plan goal, how do we make this change together, is always an easier process than you deciding the change and then waiting for them to buy into it. Lastly, and most importantly, you need to provide your team with any tools and training needed for them to be successful in their positions. Not everyone is going to be as quick to adjust, and some people are going to need more training or more time. And so being able to provide this as much as you can is going to provide you better results. Most of all, be sure that you are modeling what is expected of the team and are also actively listening for feedback or concerns and continually providing appropriate support as you make change. All right, I touched on this a little bit just now, but to be an effective leader, you need to be effective at workplace communication. This often leads to better collaboration, trust, productivity, employee morale, and you get reduced conflict, which I think everyone always appreciates. As a manager, communication means different things. Be sure that when you're in conversation with your staff, you are actively listening to their perspectives and give full attention to foster understanding. When you have a conversation or when you need to have a conversation about a change that's being made, if you can avoid it, don't bring your laptop. Leave your cell phone in your office, things like that. Any point of distraction can make it seem to your team that you want to make this change, but it's not important enough for you to set your cell phone down, things like that. Make sure you're using clear and concise messaging is also important. Expressing your ideas in a way that's straightforward helps your staff get that information and retain it better. When the need to communicate arises, make sure you choose the appropriate channel for the type of communication you're making. There are certain things that are fine to send over email that you wouldn't necessarily want to have a meeting about, right? But there are also conversations that you need to have in person. And then there's also things that are appropriate for maybe, it's not as pressing as something that you have to have an in-person meeting about, but it is something you need to discuss with someone sooner rather than later. So maybe you're having a phone call or you're delivering something where tone is important, right? And you lose tone when you send emails. Providing constructive feedback when you can is important in communication. And again, taking that constructive feedback from your team as well helps make communication positive and helpful for everyone. And then also pay attention to your nonverbal communication if you're meeting in person or even over Zoom. Body language, and again, that tone of your voice, they convey a message. So if there's uncertainty in your voice when you say something, your team's going to pick up on that. Or if there's, if you're sitting in a meeting with your arms crossed, that's a strong message for people who look at body language. Finally, don't avoid difficult conversations because you are uncomfortable with them. As a manager, you sometimes have to be the bad guy. So if it helps, consider inviting a neutral third party, like a library board member or possibly your city or village clerk, someone like that, to witness those difficult conversations. But again, their role there is to just be a witness and not contribute to the conversation. All right. I did want to talk because I have been at 4 different positions in 10 years. I did want to talk briefly about when you might need to consider leaving a position. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you're unable to make the changes you feel necessary. So, you might be asked to set aside some of your sacred cows you hold for yourself, or it might be some other reason, right? Leaving teams or organizations happens all the time, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, studies now suggest that the best way to boost your pay is to change your role every few years. So, when might you know it's time to leave an organization? One of the biggest tells for me has always been work life balance. If you are working so much that you're missing family events or life events, it's probably time for some sort of change. If you start to dread going to work in the morning, something's wrong. And when you've tried to affect change and you still dread getting out of bed, you find yourself getting sick more often, or just are generally unhappy, it's time to make a change. Um, as library staff, lack of support from your library board or municipality around changes you feel are necessary, or even just the general state of things, like raise your hand if you've continually been told to cut your budget by a municipality. I've definitely been there. That makes it hard. A general rule of mine is that if I start to see support slipping, especially that financial support one way or another, I'll start to look for change. I have definitely exited some ships that didn't realize they may have been sinking in the past. All right, a really tough one is when you realize the changes you feel your organization needs to make can't or won't happen because someone else who holds more power or a different type of power than you is standing in the way. Whether it's a staff member, someone from your library board, or the municipality, there are times when you won't be able to make change due to factors outside your control. Again, because someone else holds more or a different kind of power. It's always a good idea at those points to just maybe consider if that's the position for you. Finally, the best time to leave a position is really when a really amazing opportunity comes your way. Don't ever be afraid to go after positions that are just great opportunities for you, your personal growth, your professional growth, whatever it might be. The hardest decision you have to make in cases like this is whether or not you take a new job. All right. Well, I think that's it. We have about 10 minutes left for any questions that might be out there.
Thank you so much, Angela. As Angela mentioned, we have 10 minutes left for questions. Again, you can share those in the chat. You can share those with everybody by checking everyone in the little blue box, or you can share them with hosts and panelists. You can also share them anonymously in the Q&A if you'd rather do that. I also want to quickly mention, Leah mentioned that there will be a survey when the webinar closes. We also send it via email. If it has the wrong title, just go with it. Base it on this presentation. Fortunately, all the surveys have the same questions. I'm going to double check all of them when this webinar is finished. So just go with it, please. And I apologize for that. Angela, you mentioned early on in the beginning that change might have to happen when you know your current style doesn't work. So what is an indication of that? Is that like a real obvious in your face thing? Like, oh, wow, okay, green light. Or could there be things that are more subtle, like smaller things that are happening? Like, what are your thoughts
Sure.
on?
Sure. So, I think I kind of said earlier that I tend to try to be more strategic and collaborative. I pulled up our leadership style slide here in my leadership I really do care that my team is happy with a path before we maybe go down it. But there have definitely been times where I've had people that it seems like no matter what change I want to make, it's like a no, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And that's really for me has been a sign where I have to say, I'm sorry, your position description, we need you to do this, and finding different ways like that. Um, Again, it's finding that happy medium between like, I hate to say like good boss and bad boss or good guy and bad guy, but like everybody wants to be the collaborative, laissez-faire, inspirational leader as much as you can be. But every now and then you have to be the authoritative, autocratic leader to get things done, or to sometimes you just have to force people to change. This is what we need done. This is how it needs to be done. And either you can do it this way, or we may no longer have a place for you with the organization. It's a difficult conversation, but you have to have it. You can only work so hard to change someone. And I really don't love to try to force people to change. But every now and then you have to force something, right? So either they change or you move on without them. Do you feel like that answers the question?
A little bit, yeah. But like when you talked about like so you have a current style. What what
Mhm.
is what is an aha moment or something you notice where you as a manager might be like, okay,
Sure,
what I'm
sure,
doing isn't working. Is that obvious to you as a manager, or are those things like little subtle things that might add up over?
sure. So yeah, I definitely have. I'm thinking of two staff I've had in the past. One who very much always needed to understand like all the hows and all the whys of why we were making a decision before they would kind of accept the decision into their life. And so how I would manage them in a conversation was very different from a staff member who was like, I don't, the hows and whys are great, but let's just like this, if this is what we're doing, let's do it, let's get there. So, the person who's ready to move probably could be led using more of a laissez-faire style leadership. They're gung ho, let's do this, let's get going, let's just get it done. Where the other person who's a little bit more hesitant maybe needs more collaboration, or they need more example setting from you as a manager to see how am I supposed to deliver this new service, or how do I have this conversation about why, even something as simple as going fine free, how do I talk to the people that don't understand why we're not charging fines anymore? That's hard for maybe your circulation staff. So modeling that can, I think, be important. That probably better answers your question, Jamie,
Yes.
or the
Yeah.
question.
Well, both
Sorry,
answers. No, no,
we
no,
got
no, no.
there.
Both answers were really good. You talked about this idea of observing for a while before changes are made. Is there any right or wrong to how long that? What does that look like? Do we observe for 3 months? Do we observe for 6 months? What is too long? What is not long and what is not long enough? Or does it depend on your staff? Does it depend on you as a manager?
Yeah, it really, each situation is unique, right? So observing something that appears to be a small change, right? Like requiring a library card or ID when someone checks out. There are libraries all over the place that, small. It's a small town. Everyone knows everyone and whatnot. Well, the new director who isn't from here and doesn't live here doesn't know you, so I'm going to ask for that. Um, that I think is a hopefully a shorter amount of time, right? Than something giant like we're totally restructuring the team and everyone is going to have a different manager, or we're building a new library and we're going to two levels instead of one. So there'll be like a team separation and things like that. Um, sometimes it takes, but sometimes it's the opposite, right? So big changes take a little amount of time for people to buy into. But just the smallest, like it seems like the tiniest thing in the world, it takes some staff like a year to finally realize what or why this is the way it is. So again, it's hard to say. What's best is again to observe how people are working before you decide to maybe change how they should be working, and making sure you have those relationships in place are so make things so much easier. Again, like coming out on your first day at a new job and being like, this is how we're going to do things now, probably isn't the way to approach things. It also depends on the leadership styles the staff that you've kind of inherited, however you've gotten them, have had in the past too. Like if they're used to an authoritative leadership, a laissez-faire style leader, they're going to be like, whoa, what is happening? So it's always useful that if you can get some of that background knowledge in some way is helpful, to set everyone up for success. Hopefully, hopefully that answers that somewhat. There is no timeline, and sometimes your hand gets forced too. Like you need to make the change. The change seems hard. You keep putting off the change, but maybe whatever has influenced the change is now gaining more power. So like it's that struggle. Don't To me, I've always felt like there is a point where I'm like, okay, we have to make this change. Like we can't not do this anymore, or we can't keep doing something the same way. And so then it's just expressing to the team again, this is what I've observed. This is how I think we should do it in the future. And again, hoping depending on your leadership style, that's a demand, or it's a let's have a conversation about this. But figuring out from there.
Thank you. We are just about out of time. So thank you, Angela, for all of the great information and for spending time with us this morning in this track. And thank you to all of you for being here and again, participating. We're going to take a short break, a lunch break, if you will, and we're going to be back in this track at 1 p.m. talking about ditching harmful management techniques. So again, hopefully I will see many of you at that session. If not, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and so long.
Bye.